Our preaching text today is from Mark's Gospel, chapter 5, verses 38 to 43. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those that were with him, being Peter, James, and John, and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. Our story today is familiar. The raising from death to life of Jairus' 12-year-old daughter. And a question to begin. How many people does Jesus raise from the dead in the Gospels? 3. The widow of Nain's son in the Gospel of Luke, Lazarus in the Gospel of John, and the daughter of Jairus in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. If you came to Bible study, you would know these things. In Mark's account, we learn that when Jesus comes to Jairus' home, there's a commotion, with people loudly weeping and wailing. This was not an uncommon occurrence. It was normal in the Middle East, as well as in Greece and Rome, to have professional mourners at a funeral. They would be paid. And the more prominent the family, the more mourners would be brought in to provide a show of grief. The mourners would be in charge of the funeral, like wedding planners. And this practice, by the way, is still followed in some parts of the world, such as China. When Jesus asserts that the child is not dead but asleep, the crowd of mourners laugh at him. The King James text claims, "And they laughed him to scorn." This echoes the experience of the prophet Jeremiah, who laments to God that he's become a laughingstock to everyone. Laughter often seems to occur when we're confronted with the unbelievable. Sisters and brothers, hear what happens when God appears to Abraham and announces to him that his wife Sarah would give birth to Abraham's son. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said to himself, "Can a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Can Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child?" When Sarah hears the news, she also laughs. But after Isaac is born, this is what Sarah says: "God has brought me laughter." And everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And let us not forget that the name Isaac means laughter. The point here, brothers and sisters, is that when God announces something marvelous, something miraculous, it is better to laugh with God than at God. And it comes down, as most things do, to trust. Let's return to our story of Jairus' daughter. Jesus puts everyone outside the house and goes into the daughter with her parents, along with Peter, James, and John. And what does Jesus do then? He takes the child by her hand and says to her, in his native language, Aramaic, "Little girl, get up." And the girl does just that. But there's something here that needs some explanation. Everyone believed the child was dead. Now, let's assume they were correct. The child had died. Now, it would be all right for the child's family members to prepare the child for burial. But it would not be all right for someone other than the immediate family to touch the dead child. Touching a dead person was forbidden by the Torah, by the law, forbidden by Numbers chapter 19, which reads, "Those who touch the dead body of any human being shall be unclean for 7 days. They shall purify themselves with special water on the 3rd and the 7th day, and so be clean. But if they do not purify themselves on the 3rd and 7th day, they will not become clean. All who touch a corpse, the body of a human being who has died, and do not purify themselves, defile the tabernacle of the Lord. Such persons shall be cut off from Israel. Since the special water for cleansing was not dashed on them, they remain unclean. Their uncleanness is still on them." And being unclean was a very, very dangerous thing. What it meant is that God had withdrawn His protection from you. And so evil spirits and sickness could come and assail you if you were unclean. Now, brothers and sisters, what are we to make of this? Becoming unclean through touching a dead person was a very serious breach of God's commandments. Yet Jesus disregards this clear commandment and disregards the idea of being ritually unclean. Now, anyone who broke this commandment to become clean again would require going up to the temple in Jerusalem and being sprinkled by the priests with special water containing the ashes of a red heifer. If one did not do this, one would remain unclean as long as one lived. One could not come to the temple for worship, and a person would be flogged for attempting to enter if known to be unclean in this way. And yet Jesus disregards the serious commandment. He grasps the dead girl by her hand and tells her to get up, and she does. So the message here, sisters and brothers, seems clear. Jesus is more concerned with compassion than with following the letter of the law. Of course, Jesus says that the girl is just asleep. And in one sense, this is true. But it is clear that if we wish to be disciples of Jesus Christ, then we too must have compassion and courage as He did. Now, please understand, brothers and sisters, I'm not suggesting we go about breaking the commandments. But I am suggesting that we should allow ourselves to be moved by compassion and allow compassion to take us where it will. Remember, Jesus calls us to be compassionate as God is compassionate. Compassion is our true calling in Jesus Christ. Compassion is our primary job description as a disciple of Jesus Christ. As the South African theologian Albert Nolan notes, in the case of Jesus, it was God's feeling of compassion that possessed Him and filled Him. All His convictions, His faith, and His hope were expressions of this fundamental experience of God's compassion. And if God is compassionate, then goodness will triumph over evil, the impossible will happen, and there is hope for humankind. Nolan continues, compassion is the basis of truth. It excludes every form of alienation and falsehood. Compassion makes a person at one with reality and therefore true and authentic in himself or herself. In other words, sisters and brothers, we can never be who we were created to be unless we become people filled with compassion. This is what Jesus shows us in raising Jairus' dead daughter to life. What this reveals is that compassion trumps death. And what this means is that we can trust, and trust deeply, in the compassion of God. God's compassion is boundless and the most beautiful and powerful energy in our vast cosmos. Sisters and brothers, we're floating on a great ocean of God's compassion. We must trust that we will float and not become too anxious about this. As I mentioned more than once, I'm not a good swimmer. I didn't learn to swim as a child, but only learned to swim poorly in college. As a matter of fact, I never learned how to tread water until my beloved Beth taught me how a few years ago. So if faith is like floating on the great ocean of God's compassion, I admit some serious fears. And yet, I want to trust that I will float and not drown in the ocean of God's compassion. As the professor of religion Marcus Borg wrote in one of his recent books about floating on the ocean as a metaphor for faith, he writes, if you struggle, if you tense up and thrash about, you will eventually sink. But if you relax and trust, you will float. We need to trust in the buoyancy of God. We can take that message from Matthew's story of Peter walking on the water with Jesus. When he began to be afraid, he began to sink. Brothers and sisters, we can trust in the buoyancy of God. And we can seek to be compassionate as Jesus was. To be compassionate as Jesus is. And this requires us, though, to not only help those who are suffering. Compassion requires us to be seriously concerned with justice. As Albert Nolan notes in his latest book, Hope in an Age of Despair, compassion and justice are of the very nature of God. If we do not practice justice, we have no experience of God, because God is justice. But all of this, he writes, faces us with a very serious problem. If the practice of justice is the experience of God, we are surrounded every day by people who know nothing of God. They may indeed profess to believe in God, but they are in practice atheists. We have, it seems, a great deal of religion, ritual, and prayer from which God is absent because justice is absent. Sisters and brothers, if I were to ask for one gift from God, I would ask for the gift, the grace of compassion. If I were to suggest the most important requirement of being a disciple of Jesus Christ, my suggestion would center on compassion. Compassion is our life. And that compassion shows itself simply in how we treat one another. How we talk about one another. How we pray about one another. And our compassion is intimately linked to justice, to our care for one another. But brothers and sisters, let me assure us that there will be people who will laugh at us as we try to live compassion, who will laugh at us as we try to live justice. And let me assure us that there are many living in bondage, in slavery to compassion's ancient enemy, cruelty. We must become strong in our compassion, strong in our sense of justice, so we can face those who've been seduced into cruelty, seduced into injustice, seduced into indifference. Let me also assure us, sisters and brothers of Morgan Park Baptist Church, that God, and God alone, will have the last laugh. And in the power of that divine laugh, everything will be transformed. Compassion will heal cruelty. Justice will heal injustice. Peace will heal every form of violence. Everything ill will be made well. And everything and everyone suffering from death will be grasped by the hand of Jesus Christ, who will lovingly tell us, "Get up!" And up we will rise. Amen.